Following the success of the Sandman, it didn't take long for Uri to create the next game in the Strange Man anthology series. Titled as The Boogieman, it followed Kit Baring, who is a cold, devoted detective whose boss decides he needs to take some time off. One night, after an exhausting tour of the old castle with his wife Helena, he discovered that the tour is hijacked by the Boogieman, who forces Kit into a deadly game where the lives of his wife and the other guests are on the line. The game features voice acting for the first time, which makes this one of Uri's most interesting game yet, and it's also one of the modes that I'll be running through the entire game.
How do you do, detective? I am the Boogieman.
The game begins with Kit Baring, a cold-hearted detective who is on a stakeout with his partner Eric. While waiting for the suspect, Eric notices the ringing coming from Kit's phone and asks him if he ever going to answer that. Kit immediately turned off his phone to stop the constant ringing. A few moments after that, Eric spotted the suspect going into the building, followed by a woman not long after that. Eric was worried if they'll ever be able to arrest the suspect given that he has a girl with him. However, Kit couldn't care any less and told Eric to inform the other squad to get ready. Eric voiced his concern again about the girl being dragged into this mess, but Kit didn't care and got out of the car. A few seconds later, a gunshot is heard. The scene then changed to Kit back at the police station, on his way to meet with his boss, Dick Anderson. Anderson teases Kit for making it to the news for the 4th time already. Kit didn't like it to be honest, but couldn't care any less about what the media and the public thinks of him. He changes the subject and asks Anderson why he called him. Anderson then told him a good news. He gave Kit a month off away from work, a vacation. Kit was surprised and refused at first because he didn't want to be away, but Anderson decided that he should. Truthfully, he wanted to protect Kit from facing the media again since this is the 4th time already and it's surely going to take a toll on him. He then gave Kit a ticket to a tour of an old castle. He explained that he was supposed to go there but decided to give the ticket to David instead since he thinks he needed it more than him. Anderson then asked for Kit to leave his gun and his notebook because where he's going, he doesn't need a gun. We then see Kit coming back home. His wife Helena already knew about the tour plan because Anderson's wife told her. Side note here, we get to see that there's some sort of a distance in their relationship. If it wasn't for the voice acting, you can't tell that something is wrong with them. After meeting their tour guide Stevie, they finally board the ship. It's a 5-hour ride to their destination, so to pass time, Helena decides to meet with the other passenger who are also heading there. As Kit opened the doors to his room,
Don't just swing the door open like that. Be more careful.
Try looking where you're going before you start yelling at people, young lady.
Maybe you should look where you're going yourself, old man.
Nasty tongue on you, huh?
You bet. I was born with it.
he bumped into a familiar redhead girl. It was none other than Sophie, who you might remember from the previous game, The Sandman. Now with voice acting, we can finally get to hear Sophie talk, and I didn't expect her to sound like a disrespectful little shit. It seems that after the event of the Sandman, Sophie finally got her life back together and is now much happier and closer to her father, even gained a little attitude. Or maybe this is how she is originally. Either way, she seemed much more livelier than before. Her father then told her to apologize and introduce himself to Kit. After the two of them talk a bit more, Kit went upstairs and found Helena talking to a blonde woman. This woman is Shirley, David's wife. She told him that her husband is out on the ship's deck smoking, and after a bit of a man in black joke to lighten up the mood, Kit went out for a smoke. When he got to the deck, Kit tried to use his lighter but found out that it was out of gas. Luckily, David was there to offer him his own. We learn here that David was going to invite Paul and Marion, but Paul got sick, so he invited the Grundlers instead. David also expressed his admiration to Detective, something that will be much more important later on. For now, since he already met David, Kit wanders up to the other side of the deck and found another passenger. However, unlike the other one, this person known as Lance Canal is sort of hostile towards Kit. Lance explained that he's there not to enjoy the trip but to take pictures of the castle tour. Kit sarcastically wishes him good luck and leaves the deck. It was fairly late when they arrived at the castle and was greeted by Brandon, the owner of the establishment. He offered to take them to their room before they had dinner. We then see Kit and Helena inside their room having a somewhat dry conversation, another indication that something is not right with their relationship. For now, Kit explores the castle while also interacting with the other guests. Eventually, he wanders up into the library where he read the dark and disturbing history of the castle. Brandon enters not long after that. The two then have a little conversation where Kit learns why Brandon decided to open a tour to this castle. He inherited the castle from his parents and not knowing what to do with it, he decided to open a tour as a test. He also reveals that the castle has room with torture device that he hasn't explored much yet and was saving it for the tour next day. We then cut to a scene where everyone is having a meal in the dining hall. Everyone is happily chatting away while eating until suddenly Kit's phone started ringing. He excused himself and went out. Sophie then talked about how she noticed Kit never smiles, making him look cold and distant. Helena then said that Kit wasn't always like that. He was once a very happy and funny man. This was going wholesome until Lance said this.
He may be that way now, but he used to be very funny, you know.
A comedian or not, he's still the laughingstock of some magazines. You know about that, don't you, miss?
Yeah, thanks for reading the mood, Lance. We then see Kit outside of the castle taking the call from his colleague Eric. Eric urged Kit to take the call next time since he's frustrated that he couldn't find the important documents because only Kit knows where he put them. Kit suggests that he cleans his desk so he could see where the important documents is and asks what the situation is over there. Eric was about to answer until Anderson took the phone from him and told Kit not to worry about them since he's on vacation and he should enjoy it with Helena. Kit was annoyed by this and immediately turned off the phone. When he got back inside the dining hall, he couldn't find Helena anywhere. He thought she might have gone back to their room, and he was right. When he enters the room, he found Helena crying. She immediately tries to make up an excuse, but Kit saw that and asked her why she was crying. Helena then stopped and uttered a single word that sends shivers to anyone with a broken relationship.
Sit down. I want to talk for a bit.
Helena then told Kit that she wanted to discuss this after they got back home, but it's now or never. They're at a crossroad where they had to make a decision about their relationship. This surprises Kit because he didn't expect Helena to say that. Since it's already late at night, Helena wanted to continue this conversation tomorrow, so she said her goodnight to Kit and went to bed. We then cut to the other character in their respective rooms. We see Lance talking to someone on the phone about ways to increase their sales. Along the way, he talks about Kit's wife and wanting to do something to her. Thankfully, this is the only time we'll hear him say that because thank God it never mentioned again after this. We then see Sophie and her father excitedly talking about the tour that they will be doing tomorrow, and Sophie, who couldn't sleep, decides to talk a bit more about it with her father. And lastly, we get to see David and Shirley in the bed where they talk about Helena, and then Shirley suddenly saying that she wanted to make memories with David. David understood the task and then...
Why don't we start now?
Oh, look at the time. Better get to sleep.
Hey, what about making memories?
Hey, David! Stop it! I'm tickling! Give me a break. Like, that's gonna be a fond memory.
What a wholesome memory-making moment. After all of that, we then switch back to Kit, who tries to sleep but was woken up by the constant ringing of his phone. When he opens his eyes, his phone was not even near him. As he searched the room for it, he went inside Helena's room and found her missing. Kit wondered where she could have gone until he saw a piece of paper on the door that asked him to go to the reception hall for a surprise. His police instinct kicks in and he went to see what it's all about. When he got to the reception hall, he found the area was painted in graffiti and a figure with a long sharp nail and a bag head appeared behind him. The figure introduced himself as the Boogieman and invited Kit to play a game. A very deadly cat and mouse game. The Boogieman set up a condition where Kit needed to catch him, otherwise he will kill everyone. Since Kit didn't believe any of this, he called the Boogieman out for his lame joke. This angered him and he showed Kit something of a preview of what he'll do to the guests. He opens the curtain to reveal a badly beaten up Brandon who is hanging upside down. Kit tries to stop him but it's too late. The Boogieman took out a sword and cut off Brandon's head and then dropping off the body into the hole. A sign that the threat he was giving was actually true. The Boogieman will kill everyone. Kit couldn't do anything other than just watch as the Boogieman announced that the game had begun and then disappear behind a locked door. Kit wandered off into the east area, entering room and finding more dead bodies of the servant being brutally killed either through a blunt attack or being stabbed by a sharp object. He enters one room where he saw a writing left by the Boogieman written in blood. On the far end of the room, he saw a door with its keyhole clouded with something. Looking at it closer, it seems to be jammed with a cork. The note even verified it by giving a subtle hint of asking it to be opened like a wine bottle. Kit then went to the other room to find the right tool and found a wrench hammer inside a toolbox and a corkscrew lodged into the face on one of the servants. Using the corkscrew to open the door, Kit entered a dark room where he heard Stevie mumbling something about turning on the light. When he tries to turn on the light, there is no power to it. He remembers back in the tool room, he saw a circuit breaker and immediately went back to the room to flip it. When he goes back inside the wine room, he saw Stevie strapped to a chair, badly wounded with gashes on the back of his head. An earpiece was strapped to him. Keith picked it up to hear the boogeyman telling Stevie to repeat the word "turn on the light" with the promise of letting him go to his family after that. Judging by how badly he was wounded, it's safe to say that the boogeyman never intended to let him go. On the other side of the speaker, the boogeyman noticed that Keith was listening to the conversation and asked him what took him so long to find the victim. He then told Keith that Stevie was just a tutorial for Keith, showing him what will happen if he didn't find the victim in time. The boogeyman then cuts off the conversation after promising even more exciting things will happen to Keith. Keith then leans over to Stevie and told him that he can stop. The injury inflicted to Stevie was much more severe than what he had initially saw. He can see a large gash appeared on the back of his head and traces of something was injected into his arm. With this kind of injury, there's no way for him to be alive. Stevie uttered his final word and died. Keith then covered his body with his coat and examines the area. He found a key which unlocks the east and west side of the second floor. Going to the east side on the second floor first, he enters a room where he finds the severed head of a servant. He saw something in his mouth and reached for it to get a videotape. Keith then explored the west side on the second floor where he enters a room and found a dead servant submerged inside a fish tank. The light in this room was focused onto the fish tank, and when Keith turned it on, he found a weird writing which pointed him towards the fish plaque in the dining hall. When he examines the plaque, he found something lodged inside its mouth which turns out to be the second floor theater key. Returning to the east side second floor, Keith found a locked door which fits the theater key perfectly. When he enters, he found a videotape player where it showed footage of his wife being chased by the boogeyman. In that clip, Helena hides inside the bathroom as the boogeyman chases her. He was about to leave but then made a dash towards the shower curtain and ripping it open. He then grabbed hold of her and Helena is seen struggling to break free from him. Eventually, she managed to push him off and Helena immediately runs out. The boogeyman then looked at the camera and waved at it, showing us that he knew Keith was watching the tape. After watching that tape, Keith resumes his search for the other guests. He found a strange panel that asked for an 8-digit code. The hint to this can be found downstairs inside the servant's room where there's a note with the passcode on it. So, problem solved, right? Well, not quite, because if you entered the code, this happened. So the boogeyman had changed the code and left a cryptic message where he said he wanted Keith to get high on Boogie. This doesn't offer much of a hint since the message is so vague, but since Keith is a detective and his senses are sharp, he easily deciphered this message. So across the room, there are several pieces of music record with Boogie written on it. Noticing that the panel had colored number, Keith matches the number according to the color of the word Boogie written on the record. The result number is 710-653-24. With the correct number inserted, the stairs leading to the third floor lower down. On the third floor, he came into a room filled with suits of armor that were lined up in an odd position. Attempting to go through them will result in this. One wrong move and the suit of armor kills him. The only way through this is to move slowly and avoid standing in front of the armor. While carefully moving through the maze of armor, Keith somehow managed to get to a painting that gave him a hint to use the armor to attack a specific part of the floor. Carefully lining up 3 armors together, he managed to get it to attack a section of the floor where Keith found an object known as a bit key. This key can be used on a jail-like door located inside a room where he must use the wrench hammer to get in. Once the jail door was unlocked, Keith went down the stairs and into a jail room where he saw his wife Helena bursting through the door. When she saw Keith, Helena frantically reached out to him and was happy to see him safe. Keith then told her to wait for him there because he's going to rescue her. He tried to pry open the jail bar but to no avail. While he was doing that, Helena suddenly acted weird, telling Keith that she will be fine and told him to wait for her. Keith doesn't understand what she meant by that, but before he could say anything, Helena runs away. Going back upstairs, Keith enters a room where he found Lance strapped onto a table with a giant circular saw right on top of him. When he saw Keith, Lance immediately begged him for help. Keith rushed to help, but the boogeyman told him to not move a muscle and then injured Lance with a knife because he's being noisy. The boogeyman then goes on a rant about how he hated photographers because they distort the truth and show the public what they wanted them to see. Since Lance is one of them, he decided to teach him what pain felt like and humiliate him by taking his photo as the circular saw slowly came down. A timer appeared. Kid had 2 minutes to save Lance before the circular saw killed him. As Kid frantically tries to find a way to stop the device, he ended up knocking over the shelf because they're unstable. Behind the shelves, he found a panel that needed a code. Since he never got the code, he can't do anything here, so he moved on to the next one. Growing desperate to find a way to free him from the table, Kid uses the axe on the door to open it, and finally, he found a key. The key fits perfectly onto the restraint, and Kid immediately pulls Lance away just in time for the circular saw to drop down onto the table. Had he been a tiny bit late, Lance would have lost his life. After calming down, Lance immediately regretted for begging help, saying that it made him look like a loser. Kid then reassured him that everyone would panic in that situation, but this ungrateful piece of shit started lashing out at Kid, asking him if he ever understand his situation. Kid then told this walking pile of garbage that he also had experienced stuff like this before, where he got shot in the legs and panicked. He then asked this Sims reject how he managed to end up in the situation, and he told him that he was sleeping when the kidnapping happened. Kid then explains to him that everyone is already dead except for the others that came to the store. But instead of listening, Lance accused him for not helping Stevie and just watched him die. Kid couldn't be bothered by him and told him to not think too much of the detail. He asked him to come with him since he's going to look for the others. While moving through the L-shaped passage, Kid heard a sinister laughter. He quickly hid behind a wall and peeked through it. He noticed a doll strapped in a wheelchair with a machine gun that will automatically fire whenever someone steps into its line of sight. As he thinks about how he's going to get through this area, Kid remembers that while he was frantically trying to save Lance, he knocked over a shelf which loosened his metal board. Thinking that it could be used as a shield, he returned to the room to retrieve the metal board. The plan was to use it as a shield from the doll. The only problem is who's going to do it. Kid tried asking for Lance to do the job, but he refuses first, thinking that Kid might have wanted to send him to his death. But after persuading him, Lance gave in and became the bait. While the doll is preoccupied with him, Kid quickly grabs it from behind and throws the doll on the top of the stairs, destroying it completely. They proceed on until they arrive in a room where there's 3 lamb statues trapped between a wolf and an eagle. Looking at it closely, one of the eagle's eyes is somewhat shining. Kid found a note on the floor that gave him a hint on how to get that shining object. The note mentioned to get the lamb away from the predator by keeping them safe. Kid examines the wolf-like statue and was informed by Lance that it was not a wolf but rather a sheepdog. Pushing the statue in the correct position by placing them behind the sheepdog, a pistol fell off from the nearby wall. Kid then uses the pistol to shoot the eagle statue to get the jewel in its eyes. The two then kept exploring until they found a locked room where the door had an eagle engraving on it. Noticing that one of his eyes is hollow, Kid put in the jewel that he got and unlocks the door, which took them upstairs and into a large room where they met the Boogieman again. This time, the Boogieman had taken 2 prisoners and asked Kid to choose whether he wants to save the young girl or an adult male. He opens the curtain and we see Sophie and her father Richard tied up. The Boogieman warns Kid that he can only save one of them because after saving one, the others would fall down into the pit hole with spikes. The Boogieman then jumps down into the hole, seemingly disappearing from sight. He had an idea about how he's going to save both of them. Taking Lance with him, both of them rush down to the room below. Here, they push the table and position it directly underneath Sophie. Lance was worried that the table would break because of the spikes under it, but Kid reassured him that it will be able to hold them both. They rush back upstairs and devise a plan. Kid told Lance to pull up Richard, but in return, Sophie will fall down instead. Richard was worried that Sophie might die from it, but Kid reassured him that he won't let her die no matter what. He then gave the command to Lance to pull the lever, dropping Sophie down. We then see both of them laying on the table. It seems like Kid fall down alongside with her to shield her from the impact. This prevents any sort of injury to her. She reunites with her father, and after a bit of lighthearted jokes, all of them hides in one of the room. Kid told them that the room is safe from any danger since there's no way for the Boogieman to appear other than coming through the front door. He then excuses himself to go find the other guests. Lance then chases him after demanding Kid to answer how he knows everything about him and asks if he's going to use it as a way to threaten him. Kid, obviously fed up with him, told him that he felt sorry for what happened in the past, but he couldn't approve of what he's doing now, where he's bending the truth to his own liking. This made Lance angry and lashed out at Kid, who couldn't care any less and just threw in a weapon, telling him to use it as self-defense. He even goes so far as to tell Lance to put in the headline blaming him if anything happens to him, proving his point that journalists would do anything to put him in a bad light. Once he's done, Kid proceeds on, leaving the dumbfounded Lance outside of the safe room. Kid heads to the right side of the split passage where he found a room with a badly broken down door. Entering it, he found a painting of a woman holding a severed head. Below the painting is a writing that describes her kiss as tender and loving. This is a hint for a specific statue later on. For now, he proceeds down the stairs where he arrives in a four-way passage. To the left is an electrified floor which is connected to a locked power box that requires a heart-shaped key. In front of him is a door that led him to the chapel room, and finally to the right, Keith found two weapons locked behind a glass panel. He can only take one of them while the other requires him to unlock via a control panel located behind the area where Sophie and her father was hanged. For now, Keith took the sledgehammer with him. He went back to the area where he throws the doll earlier and went downstairs. Here, he finds a statue with a hint that says something about a tender kiss. Remembering the painting that he saw earlier also mentioned something about a tender kiss, Keith quickly uses his sledgehammer to destroy the statue's head to obtain a heart-shaped key. With this key, he can unlock the power box and shut off the electrified floor. Keith proceeds on and arrives in a passage with two rooms left and right and a stairs leading up to a bridge. He enters the room on the right side first where he saw writings on the floor and a videotape player. There's a rope nearby and he immediately knew that he needs to use it on the hole upstairs. Going back upstairs, he attached the rope to the chandelier and went down to the hole where he found a videotape. Knowing that this tape might contain something about his wife like the previous one, he rushed back to the room to see what it was. What he saw was shocking. The second tape contained footage of his wife running inside a room where Keith previously saw the painting. Seconds later, the boogeyman destroys the door with an axe in an attempt to capture her, but Helena managed to struggle and break free from his grasp again and runs away. The tape ended abruptly with the boogeyman looking at the camera. Keith couldn't do anything except watch as his wife helplessly runs away from a psychotic murderer. Once the tape ended, he exits the place and checks the left room. In this room, he found a hint to open the second weapon case. Using that hint on the control panel behind the area where he saved Sophie and her dad, he obtained a saw. With nothing left to do here, he proceeded onto the stairs leading into the bridge area. As he crossed the bridge, he saw David lying unconscious. Keith woke him up and told him to explain everything what had happened. David told him that he found Shirley unconscious on the floor, and while he was trying to wake her up, somebody struck him on the back of the head. The next thing he knew, he woke up here. Keith then explains to him what happened to Brandon and Stevie and everything that had happened so far. David was surprised to learn that someone who called himself the Boogeyman was hunting them down. He then decided to follow Keith because he wanted to save Shirley. However, Keith thinks this is a bad idea and told him to go to the safe room instead, but David was firm on his decision to find his wife. At this point, Keith just gave up and let David follow him. They arrive in a room with colored tiles where Keith accidentally stepped onto the white tile and something was thrown at him. He quickly ducked and it hit David instead. Realizing that these colored tiles must be traps set by the Boogeyman, they carefully navigate their way through the place. After reaching the end of the room, Keith saw a control panel and destroys it to prevent any more traps from being triggered. He then checks what was inside the case and found a knife which he took in case it might come in handy. As they went down the stairs, they met the Boogeyman once again, this time openly mocking both of them by telling them that they finally captured him. David then demanded to know where he kidnapped his wife. The Boogeyman then told him that he will meet her soon, and just to mess with David even further, he gave him a box that is oozing with blood as a gift. Fear gripped him as David realized what it was. He didn't need to use his imagination. In fact, he didn't even want to. The Boogeyman, satisfied with David's reaction, left the two men to deal with it. Keith decided to open the box, and despite David's plea to not do so, he did it anyway. When he opens the box, he found a severed head of a dog and a note from the Boogeyman. David slumped to the ground, relieved that it wasn't his wife, but was also pissed off to know that the Boogeyman had tricked him. Keith told him to calm down as this is what the Boogeyman wanted. He then checks the box to see if there's anything and found a chapel key. Entering the chapel, David saw Shirley tied to a cross. He attempted to get close to her, but Keith stopped him, which turns out to be a good decision as the floor is covered with gasoline. The Boogeyman then appeared and started taunting David, telling him that everyone will leave him eventually, and to prove his point, he set the chapel on fire before leaving via the ladder nearby. Without hesitation, David used the bucket of water not too far from here and drenched himself with it before rushing into the flame. Keith throws the knife towards David and told him to cut Shirley's rope. He managed to do that, but then the Boogeyman appeared yet again. He commended David for his bravery and told him that he anticipated him to jump right in. The Boogeyman then mocks him again, taunting him and do everything he can to rile him up. In a way, the Boogeyman is stalling, waiting for the fire to spread, leaving David with no way out. Once he accomplished that, the Boogeyman happily leaves the place. However, Keith wouldn't let that be the end of them. He quickly rushed out and made his way to the outside of the chapel, just in time to see the boogeyman jumping down from the open window. Since Keith is a trained professional, jumping and climbing into the window shouldn't be a problem for him. Once inside, he quickly went down the ladder and asked David if he could make it to where he's at. David said no because the fire had spread already. Okay, I'm interjecting here. This part took me a lot of retries, mainly because I'm stubborn and wanted to play this blindly. So what you need to do here is you need to raise the water pressure. Now to do that, you had to enter the barred room. You can either brute force your way or you can use the saw. Once you've entered, you have to take the axe, raise the water pressure, go back to the chapel, down to a hidden ladder at the end of the hall which will take you down to the back area of the chapel where you'll see a cracked wall. Here, you have to bust open the pipe, allowing the water to enter and stop the flame from spreading. After stopping the fire, Kit returns to David. Thankfully, they're both fine, with David suffering only minor burns on one of his arms and Shirley fainting. They return to the safe room where Shirley woke up not too long after that. After they updated her on the situation, Kit continues his search for Helena since everyone is safe for now. David volunteers to follow, but Kit refuses him, resulting in this glorious interaction.
Are you stupid? What are you even thinking?
I'm not stupid, but I am thinking. Yeah, I'm uneasy when I don't know if Shirley's okay, but I know she'll be fine there with the others.
Also, I want to add that David's wife is like the coolest girl ever. After exploring for a while and solving puzzles along the way, the two ended up back in the safe room. But this time, they heard Richard's voice in the distance and decided to check it out. When they got there, they found Richard panicking because Sophie had disappeared. Keith told him to calm down, but the boogeyman intervened, mocking how incompetent Richard was to lose his daughter. He then insults him further by mentioning his dead wife. This made Richard angry, who demanded the boogeyman to stop insulting him and release his daughter, but the boogeyman just laughed it out before leaving them. All three of them regroup back in the safe room. Keith investigates the bathroom as that is the only place where Sophie was last seen and found traces of dust from the vent above. He concluded that Sophie had climbed into the vent to go outside. Richard was horrified knowing this and immediately wanted to go out to find her, but thankfully David stopped him while Keith convinced him that the boogeyman hadn't killed her yet, as from his observation, he noticed that the boogeyman enjoys showing off the bodies that he killed and would rather make a show out of it instead of doing things silently. After hearing all of this, Richard begged on his knee and asked Keith to find his daughter, as she is the only family he had left. He couldn't lose his only daughter. Suddenly, Keith snapped and pushed him away for no reason. He regained composure after that and promises that he will find his daughter. The two start exploring, checking every room to see if there's any clue that will lead them to Sophie. Eventually, they arrive in the courtyard where both of them entered another building and heard Sophie's ear-piercing scream fills the area. Keith took out his axe and bust open the door. Going back several hours before, we see Sophie hiding inside the bathroom, possibly wanting some alone time herself. She then had a flashback of Helena where they talk about love and jewels? Okay, that's a nice reference to the Sandman. While we're on the topic of jewel, I just realized that they just casually explains what the jewel meant in the previous game. You have to remember that there wasn't any explanation on what the jewel were exactly, aside from the notes vaguely saying they're part of a human soul, which doesn't explain much if you're the type that just skimmed through the notes. So I'm glad that this game properly explained what the jewel meant. Anyways, the flashback ended and we get to control Sophie going through the vent to escape the place. She found an open vent and fall right through it. As she opens the door, she smells something weird and right at that moment, the boogeyman appeared behind her. However, this boogeyman seems different here, something that we will talk about more later on, but for now, Sophie finally encounters the boogeyman and he does not play around. He releases his vicious dogs in hopes that it will kill her and lock the door behind him, leaving Sophie to fend for herself against the dogs. Sophie then tried her hardest to survive by climbing up the shelves and running around the room. Eventually, fatigue caught up to her and she fell down, but just as she's about to get attacked by the dogs, suddenly, they fell asleep, just in time for both David and Keith to enter the room. David was relieved to see Sophie, but as for Keith, he was not pleased at all. She tried to explain why the dog suddenly fell asleep, but Keith slapped her and told her how irresponsible of her to leave her father like that. He then asked her to promise him that she never do this kind of stuff again. Sophie promises and they return to the safe room. Back in the safe room, Richard thanked both of them for finding his daughter. Keith advised him to keep an eye on her because her action could lead to her death if she's not careful. As he exits the room, he suddenly had a flashback of his son. In that flashback, he looked different than he is now. He's much more happier back then and even joked around with his son. But that didn't last long as Keith revealed a little bit to David that his son is dead. As they continue their exploration, Kid and David heard footsteps which led them to a semi-broken down wall. There's an opening on the top which Kid couldn't reach on his own, so he stands on David's shoulder and enters the opening. Apparently, this area that Kid entered was an underground area of the castle. As he explores this dark and creepy area, he started hearing phone ringing, which he ignored, but it gradually became louder as he went even deeper. Kid then enters a room where he found a crumpled paper with information on his boss. Suddenly, outside of the room, he can hear footsteps, gradually getting closer to the room. Immediately, he closes his lighter and hides somewhere where he can't be seen, and when that person enters,
Don't move. You're under arrest.
he finally caught the boogeyman. But instead of fearing for his life, the boogeyman laughed and taunted Kid by telling him how he loved chasing his wife and told him other explicit stuff, which obviously angered him, who demanded to know his wife's location. The boogeyman came prepared though, as he pulled out a taser and used it on him. He then exits the room, leaving the unconscious Kid laying on the floor. While he was unconscious, Helena appeared next to him and said this.
Keith, my poor darling. You watched me as I wallowed in the depths of despair. Now, it's time that you finally learn. You need pride. You need peace. So go ahead. Take it all. But don't you see? In the end, there will be nothing.
Not long after that, Kid woke up and found a note and a voice recorder left by the boogeyman. In that voice recorder, the boogeyman told Helena that he's initiating a deadly game of cat and mouse in which the lives of everyone is at stake. To show that he meant business, he showed Helena what happened if she ever got caught by killing the other person next to her. Helena demanded to know where her husband is, but the boogeyman denied her by telling her that Kid's life is in his hands now and told her to run as the game had begun. Kid then realizes that when he met Helena down there, she wasn't in prison at all. In fact, it was the other way around. Kid was the one who was in prison, and knowing something will happen to him if she ever gets caught, Helena decided to run away so the boogeyman couldn't catch her. Kid explores the waterway and found a decomposing corpse where he obtains a rusted key. Since there's nothing left for him here, he decided to return to David. When he got back, he told David that he managed to subdue the boogeyman but was knocked unconscious. He also explained that he found a decomposing corpse that suggests the body being killed months before the tour started. He finds it suspicious how Brandon didn't even consider that and just opened the place to the public, which could lead to a lawsuit if he's ever caught. David then asked if he's that suspicious of this tour, then why did he agree to come in the first place? Kid then told him that he did this to make Helena happy. If there's any other place that she wanted to go, he would gladly follow. But since his wife is excited about this tour, he had no other choice but to follow her. David was impressed how much Kid paid attention to his wife and can't help but admire him. The two continues their exploration, and as they move through the hallway, the boogeyman's voice is heard once again. This time, he opens a trapdoor which caused David to fall down into a room full of gas. A timer appeared, and this time, David will seriously die if Kid did not save him in time. Alright, I'm interjecting here since this part is a bit confusing. So this section might seem straightforward, where David would open the curtain and jump through the window to save himself, but doing that will kill him. So to prevent that, we need to open the curtains and then rip it apart, use it to cover David's whole body, and then make his way to the exit door. Now as Kid, it's a bit tricky to know what we need to do here, but the game already gave us a hint, provided you already turned the valve handle before. This is important because if you do that before going through this sequence, the water that is running through the fountain will show you that there is gas coming from the underground floor. Now this is where the rusted key that Kid found earlier become useful. Using that to enter the hatch which led him underground, Kid will find a key which allows him to save David. After saving David, Kid collapsed in exhaustion. He lost too many blood from trying to get the key and now he just wanted to rest. When he woke up, David was already up. Seeing that he's fine, Kid asked him to return to the safe room because if anything happens to him, he'll be the one left to break the news to Shirley. However, David refuses and wanted to accompany him until the very end. Since nothing he did will change his mind, Kid gave up and continued on. They returned upstairs and into a room full of bloody writings. David noticed that Kid was not looking well, particularly on one of his arm, where we can see a lot of cuts and bruises. David suggests they rest for a bit, but Kid declined, saying that they don't have time to waste. David, however, wouldn't budge from that suggestion, so Kid relented and they took a little break. During this break, they talk about the boogeyman, and Kid also apologized to David for saying stuff about his parents before revealing that he knew David all along. He was shocked by this and asked Kit why he didn't say anything when they first met. Kit then told him that he was suspicious of him because of the incident that happened a year and a half ago. The incident is about David, who found the hanged body of Duke McGahan. When he read his testimony, he found it suspicious. He can understand David's curiosity of wanting to know what happened to the previous tenant, but he couldn't understand how he managed to track down the owner when he didn't even know his name or what he looked like. This is true though, because earlier in the Crooked Man game, when the landlady told him that she could help him find the name of the previous tenant, David declines. Kit then added that when he asked for the note that led him to the corpse, David suddenly lost them, and when they investigate the house because he claims that he had shot someone, they couldn't find any trace of gunpowder or bullet cartridge. David denies that everything is false and claimed everything was real. He then asked if Kit is still wary of him. He replied that he doesn't anymore because when they first met, he intentionally told him his profession as a detective, and if someone was cautious, they would immediately become alarmed. But David didn't show any of that and genuinely show his deep admiration for the detective. He then told David that everyone has a secret, a past that they didn't want anybody to know, and that's how the Boogeyman got them. He uses that information against them. In essence, the Boogeyman they're facing is just a normal criminal who knows a lot about them. The two then talk a bit more before finally continuing their exploration. In this room, Kit examines the large portrait and notices something is behind it. With help from David, they move the painting and it reveals a hidden passage. In this room, there are several locked doors, with the only door at the end opens up. As they investigate that room, they found a diary possibly belonging to the Boogeyman. As soon as they finished reading it, Kit started hearing phone ringing again. Frustrated by the sound of that ringing, which he assumes coming from David, he angrily told him to stop his phone from ringing. David was confused why Kit is suddenly being aggressive and told him that he didn't have his phone with him now. In fact, he had lost his phone a while ago. He then tries to calm him down and ask him why he hates phone ringing so much. We didn't get to see Kit's flashback revealing why he hated the sound of the phone ringing. On that fateful day, Kit received a call from the hospital telling him that his son was dead. Because of this incident, both of them never recovered. It then fast forward a year later where we see Helena and Kit visiting their son's grave. Here we see Kit confessing to Helena that he failed as a father. Every day he heard the voice telling him that he had failed to save his own family. Despite telling himself that it wasn't his fault, Kit couldn't help but feel like he's responsible, and that eats him up to the point where he lost every emotion that he had. He then told Helena that she is all that he had and told her that he's going to be her pillar of support. So when the time comes when she felt like she wanted to leave him, he only asked for her to forget him. When she heard this statement, Helena hugged him and promises that she will become strong enough to protect both of them. When the flashback ended, Kit told David about his son who died being run over by a truck and how he wanted to kill the person who did this but couldn't do so since that person had died as well. He grew hateful towards the sound of a ringing phone because it brings him terrible memories. Kit apologized to David for being aggressive, but then David, out of nowhere, told him that everything is not his fault. The same word that his wife had told him before. He told him that because he felt guilty of what happened to his son, saving people is his only way of atoning for those mistakes. But in reality, he doesn't have to go that far. He just have to forgive himself. Kit couldn't say anything to that and just continued on their exploration after that. On their way back, one of the locked rooms was open for some reason. When they enter, they find an old video camera which contains a very important tape. He solved a puzzle that unlocks a secret room. In that room, there is a video player, and when he plays the videos that he found, he saw.
At last, I finally got a hold of you. Oh dear, hurt all over. But what else could I do? You just wouldn't stop running, miss, no matter how much I hurt you. But well, our game of tag's come to a close now. Yes, you can't outrun the scary Boogeyman.
You're an unbelievable idiot.
Say again.
I called you an idiot. You thought I was running because I was scared? You think I'm scared of you? Maybe you've spent too long in your little closet world to understand. You've convinced yourself that women and children are all scared of you. What were you planning once you caught me? Kill me? And then what? You'd go to kill Keith, right? You told me you had Keith in your hand. Whether he'd live or die was up to me. I guess that was true. And all this time you've been foolishly chasing after me. You poor, stupid little boogeyman. You really are such a child.
You just love bullying anyone weaker than you. Don't you dare lay a hand on him!
The clip show Helena being tied up by the boogeyman, yet instead of being scared by him, Helena openly mocked him and even made fun of him. The boogeyman didn't take it kindly to this insult and attacked her. David was horrified with what he saw and urged Keith to go find Helena at once, but Keith wouldn't budge. Instead, he pushes David away and asks him to find Helena instead. David was puzzled by his reaction and asked what he's going to do if he's the one who's doing the searching. Keith turned around and answered,
I'm going to go kill a monster.
This is no longer the rational detective. Right now, Keith is just a man who is filled with anger. He slowly makes his way to the top. Along the way, he can hear the constant ringing of phone, almost as if it's there to remind him of his mistake. But Keith pushes on until he finally reached the top. Before he opens the door, we got one last flashback of the time where he put his son to sleep. Coincidentally, they were talking about the boogeyman and how his son was afraid of it. But Keith pretended to fight the boogeyman in the closet to reassure his son that he is stronger than the monster. In a way, it's sort of poetic of how he's going to face the real boogeyman. As soon as the flashback ended, Keith enters the room and comes face to face with the boogeyman.
Don't blame it on the sunshine. Don't blame it on the moonlight. Don't blame it on the good times. Blame it on the boogie.
Inside the room, the boogeyman pulled out a knife and told him that it was time to end it once and for all. Keith couldn't help but laugh. He commended the boogeyman for giving him emotions again. He never laughed this hard before. Keith then mentioned that both of them are similar in a way, something that we will talk about more after this, but for now, Keith thanked the boogeyman for various stuff. Mainly because of his antic, he managed to gain back what he thought he had lost a long time ago. You see, he doesn't really mind what the boogeyman did. As long as he's able to save the hostage, he'll gladly leave him to the local police. But then he had to do one thing that really pisses him off. He just had to terrorize his wife. That alone is enough to make him angry. The boogeyman trembled in fear as blood gushes from his mask. The fight is on. Surprisingly, the boogeyman was pretty weak. Using his amazing maneuver as a detective, Keith unleashed a barrage of punches to the boogeyman. The boogeyman took the beating without fighting back, and after some time, Keith managed to end him. During that fight, we switched to the POV of the people in the safe room. Lance, who couldn't wait any longer, decided to go after Keith and David. Shirley tried stopping him, but surprisingly, Richard agrees with Lance and wanted to find them as well, mainly because he had a suspicion of the whole incident could potentially be nothing more than a big farce. Meanwhile, David was frantically searching for Helena. He heard a noise coming from one of the secret rooms, and after moving the statue, David sees a hatch and opens them. Inside, he found Helena on the floor all tied up. She explained that the boogeyman tied her there and knocked her unconscious. Once she's freed, she immediately runs back upstairs to find Keith. We return back to Keith, who managed to defeat the boogeyman. When he opens the bag covering the head, he was shocked to see the person is none other than Brandon himself. But before he could question him, Brandon stabbed him and declared him the loser. But he didn't have anywhere to run because David and Helena enters not long after that. Helena went to her husband while David pinned Brandon to the ground. The others soon came after that to help Keith and tie up Brandon. Keith took Helena's hand and smiled. He told her that they will continue the conversation they had before after they came back home. Once he said that, Keith passed out. It then switched to a scene where each of the victims were interrogated by the police. All of them were giving testimonies on Brandon and how he acted, but David and Sophie's were the most interesting. You see, when the boogeyman touches Sophie, she felt warmth instead of coldness, unlike the one that she experienced back in the Sandman's house, so she knew that the boogeyman was not a monster, but just a normal human. And as for David, it was revealed here that everything that we saw as Keith, the bloody writing, the boogeyman's changing face, and his sinister mocking tone, was nothing more than his own imagination. In the end, we see Keith crying on his son's grave. He told Helena that he never forget his son, but he was afraid of showing emotion because if he ever showed them, it means that he's weak. It was pretty pointless, but after doing that for so long, he had forgotten his own emotion. But when he saw Helena safe from danger, for the first time ever, he's happy. He vowed to be true to himself and not lie anymore. He asked Helena for a second chance, and with tear-filled eye, she agrees. In the post-credit scene, we see Sophie and her father in the police station. She was tired of being constantly called in to give out her testimonies. Her father reassured her that this could be the last time and asked her if she wanted something to drink. Sophie said yes, and her father goes to buy one. She then leans onto the window where she recounts the memory of her getting attacked in the basement. A pair of eyes appeared belonging to the Sandman, who looked happy after being thanked by Sophie. Sophie even told him that she missed him and the other fairies. She then suddenly looked into the direction of the Sandman, and for a second there, it almost looked like she knew he was there. Until the camera panned towards Keith, who had heard what Sophie said. Sophie told him that she's not weird because she actually encountered the Sandman and his fairy friend. Keith then teases her by telling her to stop thinking about weird, useless stuff, and even mocked her by asking if Sophie could ask her fairy friend to give him wings so he could fly. This made Sophie angry, and the Sandman, who heard that, did not let that slide. As we see after that, Keith had been experiencing insomnia. So The Boogieman is one confusing game. Even after getting all of the ending and playing through it slowly to see if there's any clue that I miss, it's still hard to understand what exactly is the goal of the Boogieman. So The Boogieman is about a group of people who went on a vacation on an old castle. One night after they all came, they were kidnapped by someone named the Boogieman. Kid, a detective who is forced to go on a vacation, was put into this life and death game where he had to find the other hostages before they were killed. Up until this point, the game is relatively easy to understand. You get a group of people who was kidnapped and you had to find them. All the while, you must track down this Boogieman as well. But after saving most of the hostages, the game at that point became a blur. Aside from the goal of saving Kid's wife, we never actually get to know why they were subjected to this kind of things in the first place. At the end, we found out that Brandon was the Boogieman, but we never get an explanation on why he did all of this. I even took my time to replay the game and read the notes slowly, just to see if there's a hint on why he did all of this, and so far, the only two notes that Keith found which had a connection to Brandon, it still doesn't explain anything. I couldn't find what motivated him to do all of this. Maybe there was no motive at all because Anderson said that Brandon doesn't know all of these people. He picked them out by random and did an extensive research on them, so that means he never holds a grudge against them, which means everything that he did in this game is kinda pointless. I guess maybe he just wanted to have some fun killing people? Now, throughout the game, we can see bloody writings on the wall, the floor, even weird things like the Boogieman changing face, but there's actually a reason for that. Credits to Uri and the translator VG person, they explain the reason why. There's a whole paragraph of it which you can read, but I'll simplify it here. So to put it simply, Kid was not right in his head the entire time. He hallucinates the writings. It was pretty evident when we explored the room filled with bloody writings on the wall, and David didn't react to it. Not only that, the other guests experienced different things when they're with the Boogieman. While Keith saw the Boogieman as this cunning, overly egoistic person with a tendency to sound like a total douchebag, the others saw him as this cold, lifeless, monotonous person. It's pretty evident when Sophie met him, he sounded like a dead man. He had a cold and lifeless tone when he speaks, which is different when we met him using Keith. The Boogieman always sounded excited and had more life to it when he speaks. Almost as if he's the ideal villain that Keith wanted him to be. And you're not wrong to think that. It was already hinted in ending 1 that Keith wanted an enemy. In the bad ending 1, Keith mentioned that he wanted an enemy, someone that is not fake to him, because up until that point, Keith is a broken man and every criminal that he saw was fake to him. He wanted someone that is truly evil, one that he couldn't forgive and gave him the satisfaction when he kills them. This will give him justice. So when the Boogieman appeared, he presented himself as this absolute evil, one that could finally satisfy Keith's craving for justice. But when he saw Helena being brutally attacked by the Boogieman, he realized that no amount of self-justice would do any good if he couldn't save her. That's why at the end he called the Boogieman similar to him because both of them are fakes. The Boogieman is using a monster as a cover while Keith is a fake guy who hides behind justice for his own self-satisfaction. When he acknowledges that, we finally see the real Boogieman, not an immortal monster who always one steps ahead, but rather a scared person impersonating a monster. So, the Boogieman has 5 endings. I already explained what ending 1 and the true ending in the previous section, so I'll be going over the other 3 endings, starting with ending 2 called White Room. Out of all the endings, this one is confusing to me at first. So you get this ending by killing Sophie and letting David die. When Kid and David goes to the place where he fights the Boogieman, they will not find him there, but when they try to exit, the Boogieman ambushes both of them. He then used the control panel to move the hanging stairs, but before anything happened, Kid pushes David away. We didn't see Kid going back to the safe room, but no one's there. He looked at his hand and slumped down. The scene changes to him back home and we saw his son. He gave him a hug and the game ended. So what is this ending about? Well, it's hard to make sense at first, but basically in ending 2, Keith died. When he showed us his hands, you can see that there's no scars or bruises. And then when he got home, his son was there. How can his son who died a long time ago appear there? Is he a ghost? That would be a logical answer considering he hallucinates a lot of stuff in the game, but that's not it. Keith died because he fell down when the boogeyman pulled the lever. Now since he died, he is now a spirit and finally get to see his son. And as he hugged him, he noted that he's waiting in the room where the sun never shines again, implying his death. Next one is ending 3. You get this ending by making sure Sophie lived while David dies. At the boogeyman's room, Keith, who's filled with rage, throws the boogeyman off the balcony. I really wish it ended there, but then it continues where Keith chooses to divorce Helena. The two of them went on a last date where they spend their time together and then... Keith murders his wife and then kills himself. To be honest, this is not my favorite ending, but what I can gather from this is that Keith was already a broken mess ever since his son died. The one thing that kept him afloat was Helena. When he throws the boogeyman off the balcony, you can see that Keith saw the boogeyman for what he truly is and throws him off. When he throws the boogeyman off the balcony, I think that's where the psychotic behavior amped up. Since he can't protect Helena, he thought of another way. I don't think he meant to divorce Helena. He still loved her, so why did he go through with that decision? Well, I can only guess that he wanted to use divorce as an excuse, spending one last night with her before they part way. I guess he literally meant one last time. Thank you all so much for watching. Sorry it took this long to put out this video. I was sick for a few days after my Sandman video went up, and then when I recovered, I immediately went straight into making the Boogieman video. But I didn't expect this game to be long because of the amount of detail that I needed to put in this video. There's a lot more that I want to talk about, but I think this covers everything. Thank you again for watching. If you got up to this point, do tell me in the comment section what do you want to see next. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this video. Subscribe for more content like this. Check out my previous video, and yeah, I'll see you all again in the next one.